So we have part two of your large scale, F scale. There's a combination of scratch building and kit bashing. We want to finish the program up. I think we figured out where we stopped. Phil's going to start your program with a entry slide, and then we'll jump right in where we believe you left off. How's that?
Okay.
Phil, you're so this is part two, and you're on.
Okay. So this is just showing the inside of the cab of my 10 wheeler. So the back head is just a piece of, I think it's inch and a half ABS with a piece of polystyrene glued on the front of it. And then all the detail gets added on top of that. So all the rivets are, I don't remember whether I did them with little nails or whether I did them with little chunks of polystyrene rod. I've done both, so I don't remember which one this was. But you can see there that all the controls are there that should be there. So there's a lubricator, there's a gauge light, there's a Johnson bar plus a lever for the cylinder cocks in there, and it's all functional. What else we got? All the complete injector uh, material is in there with the controls for the injectors. There's an LED in that little brass gauge light so that when I turn on the headlights, I get a light in the gauge light as well as a light in the firebox. Now that came with, Bachmann makes them with firebox lights. So, that's nothing special. But yeah, the gauge light, I turned that out of brass. And then the LED goes up inside there, and there's just a little opening on the front of it, so it shines towards the gauge without shining into the rest of the cab. And this, of course, was taken before I put the crew in there as well. So there is a crew in there that I created using Sculpey clay. Oh yeah, the picture down at the bottom there. So I managed to salvage the firebox door from the original Bachmann backhead and attach it to the backhead that I created. Okay, next slide. So now on to the tender. I actually used oak to create the frame. And you can see in the corners of the frame is the prototypical brackets. And I designed them and 3D printed them and stuck them in there. And for the floor, it's just 16th inch plywood that I hand scribed the board widths into, just, using like a miniature screwdriver and just scratch, 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 sit in front of the TV watching something and just, chew away at making the boards in it. The bottom picture shows the complete brake rigging before I finished painting it, so it kind of shows up a little bit better. As well as, does it show all the water plumbing? No, that's all mostly just brake. That's the brake detail underneath. So there's a single cylinder with an airline that comes from the other side of the tender. There's a big tank on the back side of the tender, which I think we'll see at the end of the presentation. And it's all basically welding rod that was bent to shape and held in with either epoxy or bits of polystyrene that were then glued into place. And eventually the whole thing was painted black. Okay, next slide. And building the tender. So to build the tender, the top right picture there shows that what I did was used a tender shell from an old Bachmann big hauler. But as you can see from inside it, with all the white scabbing on it, I had to cut it to make it shorter because it was too long. I had to cut it to widen it because it was too narrow. And then the chunks in the corners were there so that I could file the corners significantly larger than they were on the original big hauler. So, largely there was a lot of rework there to get that to be the right shape. And then it was just basically a placeholder. And in the middle picture here, where you can see my hand, I'm holding, I think it's about a 3 or 4 inch finishing nail that I've rounded off the tip of. And as you can see from the picture, I had already pre-laid out where all the rivets were going to go. And then I just went along with this nail and just forced it into the polystyrene, following my layout, so that I got the rivets. And then that wrapper was put around the shell that I had made from the old big hauler. So the big hauler, of course, was just, like I say, it was just stripped down and used as a former, basically. And then like I said, I glued all the styrene sheets onto the outside of that former to create the proper shape for the tender. Next slide. And this is showing, the top picture here is showing the installation of the dead rail system. The battery's not in there yet. It would sit in between the speaker and the balloon, or the Tsunami 4400 there. And it's got an onboard charging system so that there's no like a pigtail hanging out of anywhere, and I don't have to take the battery out. In one of the toolboxes on top of the tender, I can lift the lid off, and in there is a little connector that I can then plug into my charger, and everything goes away nice and neat. You can also see the big air tank on the back of the tender there that fits between the tender tank and the floor on the tender. The decals, I created all of them myself using draft site. The only thing that I didn't create was the lettering. And I thank David Fletcher for that. He's a fellow in Australia who is huge into Baldwin, early Baldwin paint schemes. And he created that lettering for me. But the rest of the striping, I created myself, like I say, using draft site, and then had it printed onto water slide decals and assembled it onto the locomotive. Next slide. And there is the finished locomotive sitting out on my garden railway. Next slide, I'll show the other side of it. Yeah, so there you're seeing the engineer's side with the air pump. I'm not, well, yeah, it's been a couple of weeks, so I don't remember. The headlight is a 3D printed piece that I created, and then had printed by Shapeways when they still existed. The stack is a custom turned aluminum piece that I made, and made it so that it was more representative of Denver and Rio Grande practice compared to what comes with, Bachmann locomotives. And because I used the Bachmann 440 as kind of a parts donor, so a lot of pieces were replaced. Next slide. Oh, okay, so this is the last engine that we're going to talk about. This is my 260. I mean, this is just a standard Bachmann 260. You can get them anywhere, of course, on eBay is your best bet nowadays. The locomotive itself, as Bachmann sells it, they sell numerous different versions of it, but the one that I ended up getting is the one on the left there. And you can see that that engine comes with all kinds of factory detail from Bachmann, which, I mean, that it's pretty cool, really. You've got all the air pump, you've got injector lines, you've got the brakes for the locomotive, you've got air tanks, you got all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately for me, that represents a locomotive from, say, 1900, even though the engine itself might have been built in the 1870s. Once all those safety appliances were added to it later on in its service life, Um, for me, that doesn't work. I want an 1870s circus wagon, I like to call them. So to super detail it, as it says there, I had to super undetail it. So I had to basically remove most of that stuff and remove a lot of the stuff that holds all that in there. So let's go to the next slide. Right. So again, David Fletcher, he does all these drawings. He does a lot of work for the Short Line and Narrow Gauge Gazette. I'm pretty sure these drawings were in Short Line Narrow Gauge Gazette. And I happened to see that drawing and thought, oh, that looks really nice. I could turn my 260 into that. And again, like why? Well, why not? It's a hobby, so let's do stuff with it, right? It's not just a matter of stick with what you got because that's what you got. Okay, so next slide. So the biggest difference is the cab. Well, I guess we won't go back, but the original cab only has square windows and it's very Baldwin-ish if you so that shows the cab. If you go back one more to the original pictures of it, there you go. You can see that the cab um, is square windowed. It's got very prominent panel below the windows, and it's got a sharp peaked roof in the middle. Right. So now if you go forward again. Thank you. And you can see in the drawings that this has a relatively flat but smoothly rounded roof and arched top windows with a single divider down the middle of each of the side windows. Next slide then. So this is the cab that I created in Fusion 360 to replace the original Bachmann cab. And this is just a screenshot from Fusion to show the whole cab as an assembly. And the bottom part is showing the sliding windows. So I made the cab so that the back windows would actually slide forward and open up. And then again, I had it printed in by Shapeways back when they still existed. This took me a long time to do that. And there on the left is the printed out cab in comparison to the original Bachmann cab above it. Um, and so these locomotives, of course, would have had a lead roof on them, and I used aluminum tape. And what I did was cut the aluminum tape into strips and then just take a pencil to scribe those lines into it to make it look like lead panels. And before I scribed those lines in, I just took some, maybe, I don't know what it was, maybe 500 or 400 grit sandpaper just to knock the shininess off of the aluminum. And after it was on there and stuck on, then I went over it with some watered down gray paint just to knock it down so it wasn't so shiny and to kind of make it look more like lead that had been around a while. Next slide. And I created my own decals. And of course, that again came from David Fletcher's drawing that you saw earlier. And then I created all of the decals for this thing in draft site. And just like with the 10 wheeler, right, I had to cut them up because, of course, that like the side of the cab drawings there, you can't just cut around the outside and stick it onto the side of the cab because I tried. It doesn't work. I ended up having to cut them up into individual little pieces and stick them on and then gradually put it all together and then of course hit it with some um, uh, clear coat just to make sure nothing moved after I got it into place. So it was a bit of a tedious operation, but certainly the finished product really looks pretty good. Next slide. So to undetail it, right, you can see in the middle here, what I did was I had access to a milling machine. So I put the frame up in a milling machine to remove a bunch of the detail that Bachmann had put into the frame to hold the brakes and the brake components into place. So that took a little bit of doing to get that. Um, and then on the bottom right there, that's showing the cylinder cocks mechanism that I created to go in here. So it's got functional cylinder cocks. Okay, yep, next slide. And this is the back head. So it's the factory back head, but again, it's all part of the undetailing. I had to basically strip everything off of it for the most part. And you can see that the little white dots there, once they're painted, will be replacement rivets. But this had things like a water sight that I took off and a water glass gauge light that I took off. Because again, representing this locomotive, the only features this thing had for checking water in the boiler was the tricocks, and that's it. Everything else, that was all that's all they had. No sight glass, nothing. Um, so yeah, I had to strip a lot of parts off and then replace the throttle and only a single gauge as opposed to the numerous gauges and other things that came with the original engine. So there was a lot of stripping stuff out to turn it into what I wanted. Next slide. Um, yeah, the injectors that Bachmann puts on their locomotive kind of sort of look like injectors, but they're not completely correct. So I then went ahead, did the investigation to find out what an injector is supposed to do and how it's supposed to look, and then took their parts and added some epoxy and glued things together in order to make it an actual correct looking injector. And in the bottom picture, you can see that there's control rods that run into the cab for the engineer to be able to turn on the water and turn on the steam pressure in order to fill the boiler. Next slide. Oh yeah, and the tenders are fairly small as compared to the 10-wheeler tender. These tenders are tiny. And so again, in order to be able to get the same stuff into it that I had in the 10-wheeler tender, because it's the same battery, same speaker, same Stanton S-cab setup, you got to do a lot of cutting. So the whole inner tray that holds well, some of them have a coal load, some of them have a fake wood load. You got to cut it all out because there's just no room otherwise. And then underneath, because the Bachmann original speaker is a round speaker and it's right in the middle of the frame, that doesn't fit with all the other stuff that I had to put in there. So I had to fill some of the holes, open up new holes for the speaker, and then strengthen the underside with a frame piece. Might as well have a real wood load on board. So that's just a chunk of a piece of maple from a branch that came down in a neighbor's tree. I cut it up to the right length and then just took a chisel and started beating away at it to break off pieces to make firewood, and then glued them individually onto the locomotive. Next slide. And for making my crew, these are the what we call armatures for the crew. This originally started as something that came from Garden Railways. There was a couple of articles, well, it would have been 20, probably 20 years ago now, on how to make figures using, and the fellow that did it was using aluminum foil to create his armatures. And I followed that method for a number of years, but I found that the aluminum foil just had this tendency to constantly, change its shape or lose where things or even break apart. And eventually I just decided, you know what, I'm going to make the armatures out of electrical house wire, solder the pieces together to create a basic skeleton, which then is relatively stiff. And if you look in the next frame, I think, next picture, Oh, no, it doesn't show it. Okay. But in the what I did was then I could basically shape that armature to the way I wanted it. So with the engineer's arm up in the air holding the whistle cord, and then I could build the Sculpey clay around the armature to create the engineer. And his fingers, as they're wrapped around that whistle cable there, are actually, again, like small bits of copper wire that I soldered together to make a hand. Because I found that trying to make hands out of Sculpey clay it was just insane. They just snap off and gone, and they looked like little sausages anyway. So that made a much better looking hand. And again, this is showing the cab interior detail. So the whistle pull system, um, the throttle, Johnson bar stock Bachmann, but the injectors and the cab or the what do you call it? The gauge light, right? Again, I made another gauge light with an LED in it, and all the injectors with with the proper piping for steam and water flow. Uh, so, yeah, the entire interior. At the far right of the frame, you can see the rear end of the fireman. He's leaning over the tender, grabbing a chunk of wood to throw in the firebox. He didn't quite make it into the picture. Next slide. And that's the finished product. And next slide. And that's the other side of the engine. And there we are. I think next slide. Yep, that's it.
Absolutely stunning work.
Thank you.
Museum quality. Then if you consider all the different processes you had to go through, especially those wheels, remind everybody again briefly what you had to do to make the wheels on the drive.
Oh, for the 10 wheeler. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. They were 3D designed because, of course, they're too large of a driver. Nobody makes a driver that's the right diameter. So, yeah, I designed it using Fusion 360 and designed the center of the wheel to fit a Bachmann insert so that I could then use Bachmann axles. And then had the file printed in steel, which would then have been sintered together to make a steel wheel.
yeah.
And my goodness, are they tough. Um, I found that when I went to thread the connecting rod, uh, the piece where you put your screw in for the connecting rod. I was trying to thread it and a brand new tap, and I was like, you could just feel the tap twisting as I was trying to tap it. And I thought, no, this isn't going to go. I'm going to break this tap off and then I'm going to be completely screwed because the steel it's that tough. So what I eventually ended up doing was drilling it out and then making a little brass insert with the correct thread in it, and then pressing the little brass insert in there because yeah, that steel it's really tough steel.
A real high hardness. Any
Yeah,
questions for Mike?
Lee here, I got really just a comment. Very impressive work.
thank
Do
you.
have a question. About how much time did it take you to do this project?
Well, the 10 wheeler well, I mean, I've been at it for eons, really, but once I got really serious about building it, it took about 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Good job, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike, I want to thank you for being a first-time presenter and really a master modeler. Excellent work, really outstanding.